name is Jan Kavan. I come from the Czech Republic, from CB Software, and we basically are doing narrative-driven games. We are very small in the studio. We are just 2 people. And I will be talking today about narration, not only from the point of in-game video game like narrative, like dialogues or some stories, but also what you can do to basically use this narrative and how to build it as a whole, and what you can do, for example, to tell the story of your game to the press, to your audience, because it's also equally important not to think only about like in-game blobs of text, but also to think about the meaning of it all for you and for everybody involved. I would like to thank White Night Conference in Petersburg. Petersburg is my really favorite town. Some of you know it already. I've been here 11 years ago, and I always wanted to go back, and thanks to this beautiful conference, I'm here. I am a cellist, composer, writer, and software developer as my job, so I also teach musical composition, and I do a lot of cello playing. Petersburg knows this, because I played here many times. And since 2002, I work in the game industry, so that's quite a couple of years already. And in 2006, we started CB with Lukáš Medek, who is the other guy. So he's a visual artist doing all the incredible art. And outside CB, I worked on over 15 published games, so some things I did. So this is what CB did already, and this is what we are working on now. So I will have a lot of practical examples how we are doing things today, and I will be referring to this game of ours. I would also like to know that we have our game running on Unreal Engine 4, which is helping immensely to, especially in the sphere of narrative design, when we do the visual designing of stuff and stuff like that. So I will be coming to this a bit later. To give you a bit of a taste, I just play you a very short trailer of our game.
This was supposed to be easy. Just track her down again and bring her home. I had no idea how wrong I was, and how far I would really have to go.
Search for the missing girl continues in
Please, tell me that she's safe.
Your hysterics aren't helping. Stop calling me.
Start my talk with a couple of questions. First of all, I will be asking myself and you as well if narrativity can be designed, and if we can structure this design in any kind of reasonable way. How can I avoid a walking simulator, which is a very common term these days? Everybody who is seeing narrative games says, okay, it will be a walking simulator. And basically how to present meanings and symbolism in a reasonable way. What types of narration can I use, and if I can measure their impact. And of course, the problem is how to incorporate context if we are not doing a linear game, the game which just goes from point A to point B. Of course, the main question for us as developers who also don't want just to develop the game, but also to get some public, get some sales, get some interest, if we can use the same narration to stand out of the crowd and basically be noticed by not only the general public, but by influencers, by social media, by other kind of ways how to, outside of the gaming press. I will start with the video games are very kind of traditional medium, so I go to 400 years BC, to ancient Greece, and there is a story about two painters. One is Parrhasius and the other is Xerxes. And those two guys, they competed who will draw a better image or painting. I think you can recognize this context even now. And Xerxes was very known to do this photorealistic thing, so he was just really painting so detailed images that your eyes would go out. And so he drew a bowl of fruit, and when he displayed this bowl of fruit, the birds from the sky flew and started to pecking to the image. Parrhasius was, in this case, the one who was not the favorite, but he won because he drew a painting of a curtain, and everybody thought this painting he drew is behind this curtain. So Xerxes come there and with a smirk on his face try to open the curtain only to find out that it's a painting. And this story is important for one very important reason relevant to the video games. That was the first interactive art ever conceived. Because without this gesture of opening the fake curtain, the art would not be there, it would not work. So we as a narrator in the video games need to consider that it's always the player, someone who should open the curtain, who should interact, who should trigger the reaction, and not that we just, spit walls of text who somebody has to digest. So another thing why I'm using this example is that this is like probably the very first urban legend I know about. It's from Plinius, so I will be talking about urban legends a bit later on, but it's another reason why I use this. I'm a big proponent of meaningful art or meaningful graphics, meaningful visuals, meaningful music, meaningful writing. So I would like first to start with talking about meanings and what they actually mean. We actually, when we design anything, we work with three types of meanings. First of all, there is the most important meaning, and this is meaning for me as a creator. I called it a beer problem, if it's better to go and drink a beer or if it's better to create something. So you always have to find a way how you justify to yourself that you're losing such an incredible amount of time for creating a game. Then there is a meaning for target audience, which is totally different. There is a totally different for me to make a game. There is a totally different basically reason for the target audience if they want to play the game or not. And inside the game, if you have like a playable characters, there is a meaning for them too. They have to have a reason why they are doing things, why they are reacting in the way they are reacting. So these are like three types of meanings we have to count with. And one thing is about us as authors, that our paradigm is given nothing to be done for it. It means we lived certain life, we have certain experiences, we come from some context, social, whatever. So basically, we can't change our past. We have some kind of mind frame, how we work, how we operate. At the point when we are doing the game, we basically have ours. But we have to create them for all the in-game characters. So if you have any in-game characters, and it doesn't matter if it's a human or some anthropomorphic creature or, I don't know, a box with legs, they should have some kind of history, some kind of past. They should come from some context. They shouldn't just, be spawned through some engine function. They should just, basically, there should be something before they got spawned. The main problem with meaning is that if we put some meaning into our game, they got heavily transposed. first of all, we have some idea, and we think this idea is great, it would be great narration. But the problem is, first of all, we come from our paradigm, so we perceive certain things differently than you all. If I think about some story, it has my past, it is flavored by my experience, something I lived through. So, first of all, I have to transpose it into some kind of game, which is the first problem. We have a technology limitation. We don't have skills to create exactly one-to-one transposition usually. And of course, there is the player, and they have their own kind of perception. They filter it in a different way. And they give us some feedback. So basically, this is like a triangle which goes and goes on and transforms how our meanings are basically getting around. In our case, I was fighting this with very personal way because our game is taking place in our country, in the two regions which are kind of far away from each other, and that's because we are a two-man team, and it's basically the environment of our childhood. I spent childhood in northern Bohemia, and Lukáš, the other guy, spent his childhood in southern Moravia. So they are very exact parts of the country, and that's because we have experience there. We experienced many emotions there. We spent a lot of time there. So we can base this all on something very real and very personal. Another thing which is very important is that we are operating with a real locations, which is why I was talking that it's not only about the in-game narration, but it's also about the narration for the media, for example. Let me give you an example. The problem nowadays with games is that there is so many titles coming, it's just pouring. So talking to the press is usually, yeah, but give us some angle which is non-game. So if you kill your family, we will cover you. That's basically because it will be attractive for 2 days before you get jailed. And in our case, we just wanted to bring something from the outside of video games, so it doesn't end with just with the press release, okay, your game is announced, this is a trailer, and goodbye. We always wanted to have some more material which will be available, and it's still very deeply connected to these two kind of regions of our country. Now you can see how it basically transposes. So the upper image is a photograph of a place which then you can see in the game. You can also see that we are interposing those two regions, so those kind of rocks are not in the actual landscape if you go there. But we are always counting with the fact that those locations we are presenting are real, and you can take a backpack and hike there, which is a very nice angle for everybody because this is like a very beautiful landscape, despite the fact that this is a very horror game. So let's get back to the meaning-driven games. So first of all, one thing I learned too late is that if you are a game designer, you're designing a game, you should always pair interactions and game kind of mechanics with some kind of meanings. It shouldn't be like separate, because if it starts to be separate, then it might be nice, superb system, but it's very hard to justify to audience why it's there, why it's working like it's working. And I found out this with my daughters, actually, because they always question the motivations of the game. They always ask why this small rabbit has to jump through this through this hoop. And it's very hard to explain if it's not explained as a narrative thing in the game. And you have to do it with all the three types of meanings I was talking about. And I used a very kind of specific system that when I'm designing the meanings in the game, I always throw everything into one pot, and then I'm just, doing selection, then I put them in some kind of hierarchical order, and then I do what can be used, what can't be used, and how much. I will skip this because I'm running out of time. Of course, there are two possible approaches which you can have. First of all, you can make the game so-called randomly interesting. I was at some panel, and the guy was talking about the way how they design a horror game, that they just take all the people fear which are there, they put them there, and everyone catches on something. But in our case, it doesn't really work, because we really want to have everything justifiable, even backwards. If you go through the game, you need to find the reasons for that. So we also use a lot of weird stuff. We actually have a reason and meaning for each of the weird stuff which is happening and which players can decipher in the game. So it's, anyway, a lot of weird stuff. So, I am talking about story and meaning-driven game, which is interaction-driven, which is important. So it's basically the Parrhasius versus Xerxes thing. It's personalized, which I talk, and it's personalized geographically through paradigms, and yeah, that's it. I have issues with the traditional script. You know, some of you use Scrivener, for example, so you can recognize it here. And it's very good for a story outline, but if you write a game, it's not giving you an overview. So I was looking for some better system, how to design it and make it kind of more systematic. So basically data-driven method, which is also very good with Unreal Engine because you can very easily implement a lot of kind of data into the game and you can tweak dialogues and very easily through data tables. So let's look at the narration you can use. The first and most obvious is monologues. So you have some character, he's saying you something or he just gives you some text. You can have dialogues, which is more complex because you need to count with interactions of the people. What happened? Oh, this was wrong button. Then, in our case, we have a cell phone. You can receive call, you can send SMS, you can send image messages. You can have documents. It's a very common thing that you just, open some drawer, find the document, so it's always nothing new. We have a radio, which can bring you some narration from outside world. So, for example, there is a police search going, and if you tune the radio, you can get some information. Again, this is like an interactive narration because you just can turn on the radio, listen to it, and it doesn't hinder you from walking somewhere, doing some things. Then, of course, there are cutscenes, which we try to limit to absolute minimum. And with indirect narration, it gets interesting. Because first of all, you can do a lot of stuff with environmental narration. Sometimes you don't need to tell things. You just need, for example, if you have a children camp somewhere, you can just, by type of items, type of objects which are lying there, you can tell a much better story than if the main character just gives his endless blah blah. Of course, it's always cheaper for voiceover too. You can narrate through animations. That's another thing, because the way how, for example, we have hands or we have characters, and if they are kind of slow, if they are limping, it gives you a lot of information. You don't have to tell it. You can just, use it as an indirect way of narration. And, of course, acoustic narration. So you can have a lot of stuff just by sound design. And you save a lot of money for animators because they're expensive as well. And we also have a lot of narration done through visual effects. It means if player is hurt, we have some visual effects for that. You don't have to say, okay, I'm hurt, it's hurting. No, it doesn't. But the thing where it starts to be funny is when we start to measure it. And in our case, we always start with some intuitive way, so we just, make something. And for me, I've devised a method for that for me the basic unit is walking distance time, so I'm always measuring how far it takes if you just don't do anything and go from point A to point B. And I call the interactions as a time diluter. So basically I'm just trying to dilute the walking as much as possible by different types of interactions. And I'm trying to get the feedback to adjust the values. Because for me, again, my paradigm may be that some kind of interaction is so interesting that it breaks the walking. But in other cases, it doesn't have to be, so I'm always adjusting it based upon the feedback. And it's also a good way, if you start to think about this like progressively, it's a good way to maintain variability, that it's not just one kind of interaction, that you can really make them kind of phased. So, if we look at this, we have walking, examining, manipulation, sneaking, workbench, herbalism, climbing, so lots of different kinds of way, and every of your game can just put these. You, of course, have some game design documents, so you can list them very easily. And then we have kind of non-interactions, which are kind of worse. They're kind of making it worse. First of all, are dialogues. In our case, we don't have interactive dialogues. I just say 3 words about that. The main reason for that is that if you make interactive dialogues and you don't mean them just kind of hindrance for the player just to find the correct path, you need to make consequence for each choice you make in the dialogue. If you don't, it's fake, it's bad. So we were considering this and then say, no, let's make dialogues non-interactive because we are not capable of creating meaningful consequences for each choice. So that's the reason for me. Cutscenes, horrible thing, right? Transitions, horrible things, because we have some kind of close-ups and we are kind of getting rid of as much non-interactive stuff as we can now. But this is basically what we do with the data. So if you look at this graph, this is like an Excel file I'm doing with all the kind of sequences I'm designing, is that you can see that there is a kind of time, this is the yellow line, which took me to go from point A to point B, and there you can see in this, basically, here, different kinds of interactions, and you can see how they dilute the basic walking. So I'm now doing a lot of different graphs and kind of understanding if the gameplay is there, or if it's just a kind of a long walking block. So it's, for example, this method helped me coming up with some really neat ideas. For example, not everything can be visible on the first side. You can brew some potions in our game, then you can see more, and stuff like this. So basically diluting just the basic first sight issues you have if you just, walk through the environment. So bringing kind of additional layer of hidden information there. And another thing I wanted to quickly talk about is designing emotions. First of all, one thing is the narration itself. The other thing is that there should be an emotional response. I totally don't like the games where something really scary happens and the main character then comes somewhere, looks there and says, yeah, it's just a plain ordinary table. So it doesn't make sense. So you should always count to trigger something which may be very nice, very bad, but should be some emotional response. And in case, if you have some NPCs, in our case we have, you should also make them bidirectional. They should react to the way how you react to the word. If they don't, they feel like just a stand post for informations. And again, it gets complicated because there are meanings and there are emotions for author, for player character, for NPCs, and for you as a player. And I came up with another way how to rationally design it, and it helped me to fine-tune that, to catch these kind of blind spots where the character, if you have a long quest chain, suddenly you need to make it consistent. You need to come with the way how to capture the moment, okay, this guy shouldn't be happy with you because you did something bad. So that's basically the reason about this rational design of emotions. So I made this kind of, this is another Excel, I have a lot of Excel files with our game development, and that's basically always entry and target stance of the two characters. So basically this is kind of, we have in our game a little girl, it's not the girl you are looking for, a different girl, and you basically come to know her better and you help her. And the thing is that this is basically the entry stance of those two, and the target stance after the scene happens. So basically, I'm measuring the transition, describing what happens, and then basically finding the way how they react after this happened. I always define for each scene or for each kind of quest chain some kind of emotional peaks. So what should be kind of the desired emotion of this all? I made it black because it's a spoiler. But there are also secondary emotion peaks. So basically there are some kind of little smaller things which you can design in, which make the characters feel more alive. So again, this is kind of way how I approach this all, how I basically design the emotions, and how I keep these characters kind of true to the story, true to the environment. So this really helped me, because when I talk to the press, when I talk to the people, and I basically use these things, I have enough ammunition to tell to the press. I have enough ammunition to explain the reactions of the in-game characters. Ha! So,
thank you very much, Jan. I must say that